right, now, Independent National Electoral Commission, that's INEC, has warned that underage persons who attempt to vote during this year's general election and their parents will be arrested. The commission also declared that politicians buying permanent voter cards and harvesting voter identification numbers to rig the poll would be dealt with. National Commissioner and Chairman for Information and Voter Education Committee, Festus Okoye, said the action of those purchasing PVCs would only oppress voters and prevent them from exercising their rights on election day. President Muhammadu Buhari had in 2022 signed an election reform law that stakeholders hope will improve transparency and promote inclusion. Now, Executive Director of IAGA Africa, IAGA Africa, Samson Itodo, joins me now for a conversation on electoral reform and how to curb underage voters so as to ensure free and fair elections in 2023. Good day and welcome to the show, Mr. Itodo. Now, let's get straight into it. We're on the eve of the election. And of course, we continue to hear reassurances from INEC, and we do believe that they're doing their best. But how confident are you that with these unrelenting challenges that continue to be stacked up against the Commission, that come election day, they will be able to overcome and execute the electoral reforms that we are all looking forward to?
Well, thanks, and Happy New Year to everyone. I think the success of the forthcoming elections will boil down to the personal integrity of all the INEC officials who will be managing the elections at the 176,846 polling units. Their personal integrity is critical to the success of the elections. I think that the INEC leadership is doing its best to ensure that the process isn't manipulated and the outcome of the election reflects the will of the Nigerian people. But then it's going to boil down to the personal integrity of those who will be at the field. And that integrity needs to be safeguarded. It needs to be observed. It needs to be monitored. And this is where citizens play a critical role in ensuring that they keep watch over the process at their polling units to prevent any form of electoral malfeasance that will subvert their vote. So to a large extent, it's going to boil down to a constellation of efforts by different actors, voters, security agencies, INEC officials, the media. It's going to be everybody's business to ensure that there is no underage voting, there is no election rigging in next month's and March's poll.
Now, looking at the issue of underage voting and the measure that is now being taken, which is to arrest any underage voters and their parents, do you think that this is something that's effective? Is this an effective threat that will actually work on the day? And is it actually enforceable? Do we have the manpower? I mean, INEC is barely able to protect their offices from attack. Now, will INEC have the manpower available, and the state agencies, will they be able to have the boots on the ground to arrest and to enforce these arrests on election day?
A precursor to voting on election day is voter registration. The big question is, how did these people get on the voters register? They've committed an electoral offense by just registering as underage persons on the voters register. And so they should be prosecuted. You don't need to wait for them to show up on election day to arrest them. INEC concluded the claims and objections recently. And based on the voter register that was displayed online, you could clearly see individuals who were underage at the point of registration. Perhaps now they've attained the age of 18, but at the point of registration, they committed an offense. So why are we not prevailing on those people and arresting them? Why do we have to wait for them when they show up on the day of voting? But be that as it may, yes, it's good that these kinds of policy statements and actions are being anticipated. It boosts a lot of confidence on Nigerians, but the big question is whether this will be implemented to the latter. Because there is a whole, architecture around underage voting or underage registration. First, is a function of community conspiracy. We've seen cases where the lives of INEC officials have been threatened when they resist attempts to compel them to register or allow underage voters vote. In those circumstances, what do you expect the INEC officials to do? Because the rule is safety first. But sometimes these, electoral malfeasance happen in cases where there's either the absence of security agencies. So when you talk about arrest, INEC does not have the power to arrest. It's the security agencies, the police, and all the other security agencies who are deployed on election day. Will they perform the role, of arresting these individuals when they show up to cast their vote? Or will they respond when the presiding officer draws their attention to the fact that this particular voter who is showing up to vote is underage? So these are the big questions, whether the security agencies will perform their role. It's not INEC's power. It's not within INEC's remit, quite frankly, to arrest or even investigate. It's the security agencies. And so the big question should be whether the security agencies will perform the function of arresting underage voters when they show up to vote. The second is the role, that citizens also play. That when we desire accountable leaders, we as citizens must also demonstrate and express integrity. And so if someone in your polling unit does not qualify to vote, raise objections at the polling units and don't allow and ensure that those individuals don't vote, because there's someone who is actually sponsoring them to cast their vote. And I think that point about vigilance from every stakeholder is critical in this particular situation. We've seen cases where communities have risen to say, no, they would not allow, vote buying. They will not allow underage voting in their community and in their polling units. That's the kind of resistance and resilience that we want to see from Nigerians when they go to the poll in February and March this year. Because if we wait for the security agencies or INEC, as institutions to prevent this, quite frankly, I don't think we would achieve much. It's going to take a collaboration, a collective effort from every stakeholder. So don't sit back and say, oh, yes, the police will arrest. What if the police does not arrest and these individuals go ahead to vote, especially when they've been compromised and sponsored by a particular political party? It might, lead to an outcome that is not a reflection of the people in that particular community.
Now, speaking of outcomes that don't reflect the will of the people, a relatively new phenomena is the purchase of PVCs. Now, what this is doing is it's raising the issue of voter suppression as opposed to vote rigging, or rather as a means to vote rigging. Now, whilst it is impossible for BVAS to be bypassed, disenfranchising a significant number of voters, of course, also affects the outcome of an election. Now, how do we tackle this? Because this is a relatively new challenge that we're seeing, but it does seem like a feasible way to circumvent the system. If you disenfranchise people, they are unable to vote, then you can actually sway the vote in that area. How do you think this can be dealt with?
The truth is, Vimbai, this it's just the impunity within our polity that breaks me so much. That you've got laws in place. These individuals are committing electoral crimes. But why is it that the law is not taking its full course? Why is it that when people engage in electoral malpractices and they are arrested, the system cannot hold them to account? And that's what's responsible, for these kinds of manipulation of the election that we are experiencing in the build-up to the election. Why are politicians buying PVCs off citizens? They are doing so to manipulate the election. They are doing so to suppress voters. There are videos in the public space, authentic videos. There are people who have also shared experiences. In fact, a DIG in a summit hosted by INEC in December did also lay claim to the fact that politicians are purchasing PVCs. Don't they know these politicians? Why are they not arresting these politicians? Because possession of PVCs that are not yours is also an electoral offense in the law. This is why, the point about an Electoral Offences Commission comes to the fore in this particular instance. And we need, to continue to prosecute, politicians and actors who break the law. For me, I would strongly advocate, for prosecution. It will serve as a deterrence. This point about voter suppression is quite sad, and it's one way of undermining the integrity of our electoral process. Because what you see is politicians buying off PVCs of individuals, of citizens. They are weaponizing poverty. In one video I saw a couple of days ago, they retrieved the PVCs and they give them either 5,000 or even 1,000 naira. Yaga Africa issued our pre-election observation reports, and there are states where PVCs are being sold and being bought for as low as 1,500, as high as 5,000 and even 10,000. The politicians know why they have devised this means of procuring these PVCs from people, because they want to secure political power at all costs. And the system needs to respond, because we can't allow this institutionalized impunity continue. Because if that happens, then it puts the legitimacy of the outcome of any election to question. And that can become a recipe for political instability. And this is why we call on INEC, we call on the security agencies to actually rise to the occasion. If people are buying off PVCs, they are doing so either to suppress votes, they are doing so either to manipulate the election, or perhaps also allow people vote by proxy. This again boils down to vigilance on the part of citizens, that when we go to the polling unit on election day, we must ensure the only people accredited to vote on election day are people who are the actual owners of the PVCs that they present. So we don't allow voting by proxy, because in situations where the desperation of the actors in this particular election, is quite profound and pervasive, expect anything to happen on the day of election. And the only way we can push back is for citizens to be vigilant when they go to the polling units and not leave anything to chance.
Yes.
And vote and just leave the polling unit on election day. It's not going to stop, rigging. It's going to take citizens actually being vigilant on election day at the polling unit to stop these forms of manipulation.
All right. Well, on that note and on that appeal to the public, I certainly do hope that people heed to that advice. Mr. Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, thank you so much for your insight on this, and we look forward to hearing from you again in future.